welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of Performing the Arts. My name, as always, is Bryan M. Davis. I'm your gracious host for this podcast, talk show, YouTube thing, whatever you want to call it. Joining me today is...
Hi, I'm Lindley Key. I am an actress, singer, writer, podcaster, and cosplayer based in New York City.
Yeah, so we got a lot to cover today. Normally, I've been talking to actors, actresses, singers, that sort of thing. But when you have essentially four categories that two categories I'm broadly, the two categories I already know, which is acting and writing. That's two categories I know. Podcasting, I'm sort of getting used to this, even though this is Season 2. I'm still getting used to it. And then we have cosplay, which is an area I do not know. So, in short, how did you get into the performing arts just in general? Like, what is your background, essentially? I know we were talking about this beforehand, but you could...
I got into the performing arts when I was a little kid. I'm sure a lot of people have these stories of, loving acting since they were young and growing up and studying it. And mine's essentially the same. I grew up in a very small town, and the performing arts was not a big deal, but I had wonderful parents who supported me. They took me to see shows, and I fell in love with it. I studied it all throughout high school, and then in college I was lucky enough to go to the South Carolina School of the Arts at Anderson University and study musical theater, and I have a BA in musical theater now.
Yeah. That's been a couple of recent topics that I've been wanting to talk about, is essentially musical theater. And I know musical theater is essentially a beast on its own, because as opposed to regular theater, which is essentially plays and stuff like that, musicals are much more I want to say demanding, but more physically, more physical in a sense, because not only are you essentially singing almost every other night or every night or practically twice a day, and you got to do warm-ups and stuff like that. Could you, in terms of musical theater, especially in BA in musical theater, what were you taught about in terms of getting a bachelor's in musical theater?
Things that we were taught was basically everything in your body you have to, try to maintain, not only for dancing with your body, but also you have to exercise your voice, because that is an instrument in itself, like a piano or a violin. If you're a singer, your voice is your instrument, and it's a highly important instrument. And, warming up, making sure that you're not only singing the right notes, but singing properly, because if you don't sing properly, your voice can really be damaged. So it's about just keeping everything in check.
Yeah. I know for the most part, before we even go out on stage, my professor of last semester, 2 semesters ago, a great guy named Manuel Simons. He has a great technique right before we go out on stage, that sort of thing. And we would do the same, we would do a back roll or something like that, where we just warm up our draw things that sort of thing. So so hearing that it's almost hearing the same thing, the same sort of stuff that we'll be hearing out on class, where it's but knowing that your body is essentially your tool, that's actually an interesting thing, because when I hear musical theater, it's okay, musical theater, your voice mostly, or your voice and probably your feet are probably the more of the tools of the trade, as opposed to just being your hands are going to be your tools for today, that sort of thing. So hearing that your whole body essentially is the tool, that's an interesting perspective, because I wouldn't have thought of that perspective until you actually bring that up.
Yeah.
So tell me about your hometowns. You mentioned that your hometown had little to no performing arts, that sort of thing. It was was it a very quiet quiet town where it's like they only had like a little community theater, that sort of thing, or was there no community theater at all, and it was only like high school plays or just like school plays, that sort of thing?
Well, I grew up in rural North Carolina where NASCAR was invented. That's where I grew up. So that should tell you everything you need to know about North Wilkesboro, North Carolina. It is a very small town. If you know what the Andy Griffith Show is, it's basically Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show. But it's very, very nice, very quiet. All the people, they know everybody's names. They know everybody's business. And we did have a wonderful community theater program, and it's one that once my parents realized that I enjoyed playing characters and being creative, my teachers literally took my parents aside to be like, there's a community theater audition. If you do not take her, we will. So we would always have the Wilkes Community Players at Benton Hall. And, they did Wizard of Oz a lot. So I played a Poppy. I was in the Lullaby League. I was in both Annie and Annie Warbucks. In case you didn't know, there is a sequel to Annie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, oh, yeah, I remember that now. It's like I vaguely remember hearing about like not necessarily Annie 2, but just like the Annie Warbucks like characters. Like, oh, that's probably just her just... When she's adopted at the end, she's like, "Oh, she's just Annie Warbucks." But then you hear like, "Oh no, there's a little orphan there," and it's like, "Wait a minute, this too?"
Yeah, I think it was based off of an old radio show, and they made a sequel to the musical. I don't think it ever got big. It's rare for a musical sequel to get big unless it's just amazing. So
I'm looking at you, Love Never Dies.
Oh, don't get. Oh, we.
I'm sorry.
Anyway.
I'm sorry. Andrew Lloyd Webber, if you're watching this, I am sorry, but it was a joke that I had to say. I love Phantom of the Opera. It is one of my favorite musicals. But what were you thinking? Seriously. Anyway.
Anywho.
Moving on.
So, yeah, back to the hometown. We had a community theater, but as far as drama in schools, it was basically non-existent except for a couple high schools. The middle school that I went to had a chorus program, but the high school that I would have gone to we moved from North Carolina to South Carolina right before I started high school. If we would have stayed in North Carolina, the high school I would have gone to would have had no drama program. They had chorus, but no drama.
Yeah.
And I was kind of an outlier in my town because everyone was very down home, very, country music. And I was off in the corner going, the Phantom of the Opera is there. And no one else liked musical theater like I did. So when I moved and I got to be in an environment where we did have a drama program and we did plays and musicals and one acts, it really helped spark that love of the performing arts that I have.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of my high school. I think for the most part, there was a singing. I want to say there was because my music teacher, who unfortunately passed away like a couple of years after I graduated, he was a big rock and roller. So he used to teach a lot. He would teach us like a lot of rock and roll. He had his own like rock and roll club that and I think I was a part of it. I want to say yes, but and I know I kind of like guilted him into having us learn doing banjos in class one day, and he was like, Brian, do you really want to learn that song? It's like, yeah, I've always heard about it, but is it possible for us to actually learn the basis of ding 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 ding? And I know he had like his own like rock thing, and they kind of like carried that rock club. I want to say maybe a couple of years after his passing too, but when I was at high school, we had, I believe we didn't have like a theater thing there. It was, even though there was like a musical, not musical, even though there was like music classes, how to play, rock, that sort of thing, because one of the times I do remember there was actually a full-on performance of the rock performance by the rock club, and this was during a concert too. So, but there was no like theater things, but like say maybe a decade or so after I had graduated or so, I start learning that my high school has a drama club now, or at least a drummer has drummer act, which has always been interesting because a lot of my teachers have always said, oh, you have a very great voice for radio, that sort of thing. Why don't you try acting when you were older, that sort of thing. Like really hyped me up in terms of my, just being an actor, that sort of thing. And if I had, like what you just said before, it was like I would, I grew up watching movies. I grew up watching a lot of movies, that sort of thing. So acting kind of stuck with me. So if I had that outlet of having like a drama class in my high school during that time, I probably would have had a lot more understanding of what acting is, that sort of thing, as opposed to just like coming into community college where acting is kind of like very jumbled up. And then once you go into college itself, acting is like you kind of like learn the stuff you knew about community college, and that's sort of like well, in community college or wherever, toss it out right now. We're learning new stuff, that sort of thing. So yeah, especially the type of teachers, the type of professors I've had in the past. So yeah, who will be fun, but at the same time they will be like, okay, the stuff but the stuff you know now, just toss it out. We're not doing. Yeah. We're not doing Meisner. We're not doing Chekhov. I mean, we're gonna be learning about Chekhov, but we're not doing that type of acting. That's what. We're not learning how Brando was method, all that stuff. We're learning about. We might talk about why Brando was method, that sort of thing. Yeah. We might talk about Stavislavski, that sort of thing. But it was like all the stuff that you kind of knew in the past. It was like this. Check that out and just wear that because we'll be teaching you new stuff that's kind of like in the basis of that stuff. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like I trailed off, but
no, you're fine. It's amazing how different teachers will focus on different forms of teaching acting. It's never really consistent, but I think it's important to learn all of these ways and all of these methods to find out what works for you, because someone might really be drawn to Adler and not Stanislavski, and that's how they perceive acting and how they are able to get their emotions across. It really does differ. Going back to the acting in musical theater in the body, we had one professor who took the whole physicality and took it to extremes. We spent the first half of the semester just exercising.
Oh, wow.
To the point where it took someone getting injured to finally be like, okay, we're going to do monologues next time. Because we were doing like hamstring workouts. And the next class, a friend of mine comes in on crutches. She doesn't say a word. She just takes her crutch, points it at the teacher and goes, "You." And it's one of my favorite college memories ever.
Yeah.
And then after that, we finally started studying text.
I think that's the reason why when I was in community college, I had the voice and movement class separate from my regular class. Because the voice and movement class, that's fun. And even though that was twice a week for like 50 minutes, but you only need like maybe an hour or so just to do that. But doing like that for like long stretches of like literally long stretches for like hours on end, that's not like the best way of preparing an actor.
It's counterproductive.
Yeah, the best way to prepare an actor is really just have them like freshen up their mind, having like because the way my professor Manuel, I know I call him Manuel because of the way his name looks, but he pronounces as like Manuel, like how you would say manual, like a car manual. But Manuel, he had a great repetition thing where it's like, we're going to do the bouncing ball thing. We would do like, toss like the fake bouncing ball to them. And then it was like, and he would like look around. It was like, hey, do like that. And then it was like, all of a sudden, like after a couple of moments, like these 4 different balls, it's like, and then we would actually do where it's like, and how would you feel like after all that? It's like, I feel like I'm very refreshed. It's like, good. I'm actually letting you like get more creative, like having you remember more and more, because the more you remember, the more you become because essentially the more you remember, the more you were able to remember your lines, that sort of things, it helps you become a lot more naturalistic in terms of like it being an actor.
Yeah.
And I know being an actor is just being, oh, you just say your lines, that sort of thing. But when you're out on stage, it's a whole different feeling. And I'm pretty sure it's a whole different feeling when you're doing like a musical, because that's like a whole different feeling whatsoever.
Yeah.
Okay, so you came from a very small town, practically the home of NASCAR. How was transitioning into that portion into once you got into New York? Like, how long did you actually get into the New York lifestyle? Where it was like, you kind of like got used to the New York, like, hey, I'm like the whole, hey, I'm walking over here.
I'm walking here. Give me a cup of coffee.
Yeah, it's like you got used to the whole. It's like, hey, I'm gonna need a bacon, egg, and cheese on the roll. Like, I need that chopped cheese. It's like how long did it take? Because I know people who, because I was actually with a couple of my guests in the past, they aren't like. They were, essentially international people coming into America, especially coming into New York, that sort of thing. But the people who have been essentially from one state into another, it took them like say a relatively short time. So in terms of like getting used to essentially the New York lifestyle, the New York mentality, how long did it take you essentially to I want to say get used to New York in general, especially coming from a very small town?
Honestly, I think it's still an ongoing, a work in progress, an ongoing process, because I was raised in a small town, and even after we moved, it was still not a big metropolis area. I was very lucky. My parents would, we would sometimes fly to New York so I could come see shows. But, staying for a week or so in New York is not the same as actually living here and getting used to the lifestyle here. It's a lot of, I was raised in a very Southern household, and sometimes my accent will slip, especially if I start talking about home, I'll slip into my Southern accent again. But I was very much raised in the whole importance of politeness. So saying, excuse me, if you bump into someone, calling someone yes, sir, yes, ma'am, as a sign of respect. Figured out probably within my first year of living here, that was not the case in New York.
Yeah.
People didn't say excuse me if they bumped into you or knocked you down in the subway. I had a boss. I worked at a restaurant in Times Square. It was an awful place. And my boss had asked me to do something, and I said, yes, sir, because I was raised that was, polite. Yeah. And he gives me this nasty look, like, don't call me sir. Don't do that. Why'd you do that? And then walked away. And I'm like, okay. A couple weeks later, he asked me to do something again. And just because it's engraved in my brain, I said, yes. I said, yes, sir. He gets in my face like, stop calling me that. Why do you do that? And it took every ounce of my being not to look at him and say, well, I'm sorry, sir. Where I'm from, that's a sign of respect. If you don't want me to respect you, that's fine too.
Yeah. I noticed that I grew up with a very Italian, Irish, Scottish, Swedish household. So I'm very vastly European. I kind of joke. And a lot of the things that I kind of like, my grandparents, they would always be very gracious and all that stuff. But when I'd be going to school and whatnot, I would be like almost a bit like, yeah, it's odd because how it's like when you go to school, that sort of thing, especially as a kid, you're kind of like used to saying, Mr. Mr. Smith or Miss, Miss Turner, that sort of thing. I have to be very gracious, that sort of thing. And when you're with your grandparents, it's like, again, the same thing. But when you're out in the world and your boss gives you like a look about that and how you're trying to be, and again, I worked in a place that one of my jobs, especially as an actor, was doing ushering, and I won't say the name. I won't say the theater name, but it was a very prominent off-Broadway theater within the the Broadway circuit. So I'll just say that. And my house manager, he was, I want to say a type A personality or at least something like that. And he was like really, really anal about, if you got here late, that sort of thing. So it's like, and then when he would be off the clock, i.e., when the play has started, he'd be just like, Lily, I'm sitting down, just like looking at his phone, just like as all the other, like all the other ushers. But if I had got here, like say 5 minutes later, it's because of the trains, because getting to the theater, there's always going to be a problem, especially if you're going into Times Square, which is where which is where most of the plays are going to be. Mm-hmm. And especially if you're running down the block and you gotta be like plowing through essentially all these people, just to get to the theater on time. And sure enough, the day I actually got to the theater on time-ish, I was just coming off from my class of that day. I didn't get a chance to change my thing, and he was like, you know what, I've had it up with you. It's like, you're wearing the work pants, just go home. And I was just wearing I was actually wearing pants that were essentially blue, but they looked dark in different lighting. And and I thought they were like black pants because they were black pants, but I was like, no, they're blue. And they're like, okay. And I walked away from the theater very sad because I felt like very disheartened because, I tried to respect this guy as much as I could, but in the end, he wasn't respecting me. And of course, I have, different problems altogether, especially with people being around me. I have I've been essentially combating social anxiety for the most part, that sort of thing. So being in a theater, especially as an usher, was like the most, I want to say, stressful job, but still the most fun job because I was still helping people, that sort of thing. And it's sort of like the moment I'm thinking about my job, like all that stuff is like falls away, that sort of thing. But and of course he didn't really have he never actually took me off to the side. He's like, Bryan, I need to talk to you for a few minutes. Can we talk? It's like that sort of thing. He never actually took me to the side. He always had this more very professional thing. So hearing that, and I have a funny feeling. Did your boss or anything actually take you aside? Like, why do you keep on calling me sir? Or was it just like, yeah, essentially?
No, he was a jerk. He was just an overall jerk. And that's another thing I've learned about being here. I am a big people pleaser. I want everyone to like me. So living in New York, I've realized, you can't please everybody. There are going to be some people you will try your darndest to make friends with. And some people just don't want to be your friend.
Oh, I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, you have to learn to accept that. You're not going to please everybody, and it's not worth it for your own mental sake to, beat yourself up if this person doesn't want to be your friend. You just say, all right, I tried, their loss, move on.
Yeah, I think for the most part, being an actor, especially when you need that survival job or just job in general, it's odd because when you're an actor, you're kind of very used to, I want to say, actors are very used to getting orders from a director, and the director always being either very nice or, depending on the director, being very mean. So in a way, actors with their regular job, I think they do want to be very nice, be people pleaser, as you just mentioned. But at the same time, actors are very methodical people, and they do things that they're very cliquey at the same time. So even when they're on your job and you have another actor, they're like, oh, you're an actor. I was like, oh yeah, you're an actor, okay. And you're just like, all the actors in the job just start hanging out with each other. And here's you who has a career in theater, but you're kind of like a stagehand sometimes, or you do audio engineer, or you do visual arts, and you don't have that kind of connection because you don't have that mentality of acting, where it's you don't know all these places, that sort of thing. And I do have that mentality of acting, but I don't have this background of acting. So it's very. I kind of joke that I'm kind of I have this very Blade-esque way of walking between two worlds, where I'm just I'm both on the technical world, where I'm more into technical theater, But at the same time, I'm able to walk in the world of just being as an actor too. So like I'm able to walk between these two things and still be able to be mistreated because I'm still not like an actor almost for that. But yeah, and again, but to move away from that, because again, just talking about like getting jobs as actors, that's like a whole discussion by itself. Especially when you're a starting actor, that sort of thing. So you mentioned that you are a podcaster. Because I'm going to save the cosplay stuff last.
Okay.
Because I feel like that's the more stuff that I don't know about more so. But so I'm just going to do the stuff that like I know it's like you mentioned your writer shows. Like I've talked a lot about writing in my show previously, so I'm kind of like tapped that way. So it was supposed to, so I feel like even if I start talking about writing on the show again, I feel like that's another discussion by itself. So, but podcasting, how did you get into podcasting?
So I got into podcasting thanks to two of my friends that I went to college with. They were seniors when I was a freshman. So they had already established a podcast called Popcorn Prattle. And that podcast basically just talked about movies, entertainment. They did reviews, lots of nerdy things. So my specialty. So it was a group of three guys, and one of the guys, life happened and he decided to bow out. So I was friends with both my friends, Marcus and Steven, on Facebook. And I would post like Game of Thrones memes or stuff about the upcoming, Marvel Cinematic Universe. So they saw that I was a bit of a geek. Marcus had messaged me, be like, hey, we do a podcast. Do you want to come be a guest on it? I said, yes, let me talk about all of these things that I love to talk about. And we did one podcast. And after that podcast went up, they're like, do you want to do this all the time? And at the time, I had been in New York a full year, going on 2 years, if not a full 2 years. And being, in the audition circuit, getting a lot of rejection, I was starved for something that I could, release my creative side on, both in talking about things that I'm really passionate about, helping with social media, making different things. I didn't think twice before saying yes. And we've taken a little break due to all of the quarantine-ness and all the craziness in the world. But I've been on that podcast with these two guys for over 3 years now, and they have become two of my best friends. We still check up on each other. Awesome. See how life is doing. If we ever have a problem, we're like, hey, can you pray for me? Can you, keep me in your thoughts? It's just a very nice, tight friend group that we have, and I'm very thankful for them. And so, we just talk about things that we're passionate about. And that's the great thing about podcasting. You can make a podcast for whatever you want. Yes. And it's amazing when you find an audience and you find people who, are passionate about the same things.
Yeah, and that was sort of like the same thing I've gotten early this year was this is how that this show got into my idea, was that I was on my way back home from my job, and I was in this tunnel, and you know how the tunnels are, because like, especially when you're going back into Brooklyn on the D train, that is going straight in, like you're crossing the bridge, and then you're going into the tunnel, going to Atlantic, like going back to Atlantic Center. But during that little time, you also stopped by DeKalb Avenue, and I believe I was by DeKalb Avenue, or because I remember being by it. And then I just remember thinking, what would be a great show? Just talking to various people about their performing arts or something like that. And then I just started thinking about that idea more, and then I put that idea out on my Instagram, social media, and then one of my friends, my first guest actually, Frankie, he got into the idea too, and he says, you know what? I'm gonna be your first guest. So once you get this idea off rolling on the ground, I want to be your first guest. And of course, by the time this was all happening, this was during when COVID was starting to becoming a lot less of a day. I mean, not necessarily. It was becoming just as dangerous in New York City, but not as dangerous because the cases were starting to rise, but it wasn't really rising yet. Mm-hmm. So it was in that, like, I want to say, like, that little grace period where it was like it wasn't serious, but it was still becoming a serious threat.
Yeah.
And I had the idea, it was like, okay, you know what? I could go around New York City, find people, talk to people, all that stuff, and actually take my phone or something like that, my recorder, that sort of thing, and actually record an hour or so of this, me and this person, whoever, just talking over the thing. And then, of course, when Corona hit, it's like, okay, everything that I had planned happened to be like, okay, I can't go out and do all this stuff now, because even if I do that now, it's like, I gotta have probably like a team backing me up. So this is how this whole idea, especially because of last semester, all my class, the majority of my classes were on Zoom, so I became a little more familiar with Zoom and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And just being able to talk with people on Zoom became much more of a normal thing. So yeah, and the thing about podcasts, especially if you're like a 3-person team or 4-person team, you need to have that energy between between 3 of you or 4 of you or how many of you together in one room. Because even if you're doing like this, that's fine. But you still need to be in the same room together because you're essentially feeding off the same energy as everyone else.
Well, my friends and I, we actually record in 3 different states.
Yeah.
I'm in New York, my friend is in Virginia, and another friend is in North Carolina. So we record separately, but we already have that rapport with each other. So, we have inside jokes that make it into some podcasts. We have relationships that, carry on through each episode. Little lines that, people have started saying. We try to keep up with social media. We have an Instagram page, a Facebook page. We have a separate Facebook page where some of our listeners will join and just talk about movies themselves, and then we'll chime in if we feel like it. Be like, oh, this person got casted as this. How does everyone feel about it? Or, this movie got pushed. Are we disappointed? Do we think it's a good idea? So having that rapport with your team is incredibly important, but also building that with your audience too. And we've tried to do that. We've done a live show in Virginia, which was one of the funnest nights of my life. And we have a couple annual things that we try to keep up engagement, not only for the people who do listen already, but for the people, who haven't discovered us yet. And we're like, hey, we're doing this cool thing. Come join along and, give the podcast a listen. We have our own, award show, like our fake Oscars, but we also do a March Madness, but instead of with sports, we make it about movies. And we try to keep it fresh every year. So the first year we did it was, a bracket of our favorite movies. And the great thing about our team is that we each have very different, favorites. Like our genres and our favorites, we are very different. Marcus and I, we're big on, superhero films and we love franchises, but there are some franchises that I love that he's not into, and there's some that he loves I'm not into. And Steven is much more, he loves animation. He loves talking about, lesser known movies that Marcus and I don't even know about, that aren't popular. So the first year we did March Madness, it was just our favorites. And I won that year. I'm the winner 3 consecutive years in a row. I'm just going to say that. So each year, whoever wins gets to pick what the theme is. So the first year I won, I was like, okay, next year we're going to do March Movie Musical Madness. And then this past year we did March Movie Madness Massacre, and it was all about not just horror movies, but horror icons.
Ooh, okay.
And so we tried...
Who won the icon?
I think it was Frankenstein. Boris Karloff's Frankenstein's monster. I'm one of those awful people who are like, excuse me, it's Frankenstein's monster. Frankenstein was the doctor. I'm that awful, awful person.
Yeah, I tend to call him the creature anyway, or because the creature, or because I know in Penny Dreadful they call him like I think Adam or Prometheon or something like that. So it's like when you call the creature like Adam or something like that, it's very and it's odd because I'm very like I have a Catholic upbringing, so hearing Adam is like. It's just like Adam and Eve. Then I'm pretty sure that if they bring in the bride, they got to call her Eve, right? But when they don't, but I'm just kind of glad, it's like when they have like ideas for the Frankenstein monster, especially, or the creature itself. Well, I can't call him the creature because there is a creature from the Black Room, so it's like when you say the creature, I'm like, which creature do you need? Frankenstein or creature from the Black Room?
Specify which creature you are discussing.
Yeah, so. When I'm talking, so Frankenstein's monster, I think it's probably a lot more better to say than a creature. But when you're talking about when you're saying Frankenstein's monster and then you refer to it as the creature, people are like, okay, people know what you're talking about. But
yeah,
I think in terms of Frankenstein's monster in general, or just Frankenstein in general, I think he has a great staying power because of not only a presence but also just backstory in general. Because you know, Victor Frankenstein or Frankenstein, depending on how you say it, or depending on how you see
which universe you're in. Are you in the Universal universe or are we in the Mel Brooks universe?
I always loved that interpretation of Frankenstein. It's now pronounced Frankenstein. But in terms of Victor, you know. It's odd because, you know, some films have portrayed him as the hero. Some films have portrayed him as like the mad scientist. Some films, like the Hammer series, have portrayed him as being like almost evil as the monster itself. And then when you look at the monster itself, you're saying, oh, he's always just like, he's either big, dumb, or big and brooding, or a big brute with genius, like a genius level mind. Or Robert De Niro in makeup. So, and again,
that version.
I love Kevin Branagh, but Kevin Branagh's Frankenstein is so over the top. And yet I still love it.
I don't know why he was shirtless the entire time he was trying to make the creature. That blew me away. And he had a mullet too.
It was the 90s.
It was shirtless Dr. Frankenstein with a mullet.
It was the 1990s, okay? Mullets was
yes, it was right after Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula came out. And this was basically Sony's Dark Universe.
Yeah, essentially. And there's only two. Well, actually, okay. I'm not sure if they're in this. I'm not sure if they made the same movie, but I know Mary Riley also came out at the same time. But I'm not sure if that was Sony too.
I think so. There's a great video about this exact topic by Patrick Willem on YouTube. Yeah. Highly recommend everyone watch it because it kind of discusses what was the Dark Universe before Universal thought of a Dark Universe.
Dark Universe.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, the Dark Universe itself could be a whole.
That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, and. Speaking of Dark Universe and all that stuff, I noticed in the background you do have the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Yes.
So, and I know the costume on your left, which is my right. So I was about to say on the right, but that's your left. But yeah. How did you get into cosplay? That's a very long-winded. It's like, how did you get into cosplay by just pointing out two cosplay items in the background?
Oh, the things I have in the background for this exact episode. So cosplay, it really started. My love for costumes and dressing up kind of started when I was a kid. I've always taken Halloween very seriously. I was always the kid that wanted to dress up and no one understood who I was, but I didn't care. I was living my best life. So, loving Halloween, getting to dress up. I was an only child growing up. So I spent a lot of my days waking up, with my imagination running wild, thinking, I'm not going to be Lindley today. I'm going to be Belle, or I'm going to be Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. My parents actually had to, my first day of kindergarten, I was obsessed with the Flintstones for some reason. They were like, Lindley, okay, I need you to listen to me. You're not Pebbles today. You're going to be Lindley. I was like, okay. And then when Mom picked me up, I saw her. I was like, Wilma, you're finally here. My mom's name is Susan. So that also, kind of helped my parents realize that I was very creative. I didn't have childhood schizophrenia. I just really wanted to be an actor and play these different characters. So when I moved to New York, in the Carolinas, Comic-Cons were not really a thing. And it's something that I've always wanted to go to, be in rooms with people who love the same things as me, love things that when I was a kid, I got made fun of for. I had kids, bury my Star Wars books in the playground. It was not cool to be a geek back then.
Well,
so
because
being able,
Yeah, so being a geek, especially, me having glasses, wearing glasses throughout my entirety of growing up is like, a geek, that sort of thing, a nerd. So I was, of course, always like an easy target. So,
it was before becoming a geek was profitable like it is now.
Yeah. It's like, and I'm not talking about being a geek like being on Big Bang Theory being a geek. I'm actually talking about being an actual nerd geek, where it's like you actually own up to everything and not being, I'm Dr. Shilton or something like that. And again, I know and I'm sorry about that. And it's odd because I've actually watched the Harley Quinn cartoon and I've watched Hollywood, and I know Kelly Coco and Jim Parsons. What's Parsons or
Parsons?
Parsons. Let me think of Parsecs.
Parsecs is the Star Wars.
Yeah. Again, I'm kind of like dyslexic too, so. But I know both Kelly and Jim are fantastic actors, but when they're on that show, they're like...
They're amazing.
They are amazing actors, but when they're on that show, they're just like... Oh, it's like they're just running into they're just like running into a wall, that sort of thing, where they just know... They're just silently collecting their paycheck, that sort of thing, and just saying all these lines. But when you watch something like Harley Quinn and you hear Kelly's Harley Quinn, I'm like, that is just...
She's a fantastic Harley.
Yeah.
So when I moved... Yeah, go.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so when I actually moved to New York and was able to attend New York Comic Con for the first time and seeing pictures of all these people in their cosplays, I wanted nothing more than to do that myself. So I thrifted together a Scarlet Witch costume. It wasn't great. I went to the Marvel booth and they thought I was trying to be Peggy Carter. I was like, no, I'm Wanda. And just seeing both the dedication that people put into their costumes and their basic performances of these characters that I've grown up to love, or new characters that I had gotten an appreciation for. It was inspiring.
Yeah, I've seen videos of people who have, wear these costumes, that sort of thing, especially around like Comic-Cons, like New York Comic-Con, or Comic-Cons over the seas, and I'm like, a lot of this stuff is like it's like, yeah, it's just homemade, or just like homemade in general. Whereas it's like someone could dress up as Cable from X-Men and be very comic accurate, or they could dress as Cable from Deadpool 2 and be more accurate towards that that Cable.
Yeah.
Where it's like Josh Brolin, be like almost Josh Brolin, that sort of thing, and it's odd how in the past cosplayers, that sort of thing, I will say it's like it got into a bad rap because a lot of these people, you will probably say, these will probably be people who will be on the first line on a midnight showing for a movie that's coming out that's a blockbuster. That's like, and it is odd because I'm finishing up Avatar. I'm on season 3. I just finished season 2, which was amazing, and I'm just giving myself a couple of days off to watch season 3, and a mutual friend was like,
Yeah.
kind of like upset because like, what? You're like, how can you stop on season 2? It's like, you should watch season 3 as of right now. I'm like, no, I needed some time to, like, after season 2, I just needed some time to stop. And then I'm watching old videos of like how, and then I see a video on Avatar when the movie came out, which I haven't watched, but I've seen like clips of it of the movie. I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but I haven't really experienced the Avatar movie until I've actually watched the show, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of heat for this. But from the stuff I've actually seen in the movie, it looks generally all right. I understand what M. Night was doing, but he had it's like the same thing with Joel Schumacher, who unfortunately passed away a couple of weeks ago. He had the same problem with Warner Brothers when he was doing Batman and Robin, which was saying the studio really wanted to have a big, fantastic toy commercial, and I think that's what Nickelodeon wanted in the end. Was essentially
he actually came out and apologized for those movies, and makes you feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, it's like I have the Blu-rays of the Batman movies, and I know that's one of the special features is Joel Schumacher apologized for Batman and Robin, but it's odd, but. Watching this video of like Avatar when it was coming out opening weekend, you just see all these people dressed as characters from the show. And if this was like maybe 20 years ago, people who were dressed as characters from this certain movie or what have you, they would be like mocked and scrutinized. It's like, oh, if this was like the Phantom Menace, people would be like, oh, look at that guy dressed as Luke Skywalker, like ha ha, that sort of thing. Yeah. But now we are in 2020. Even though we're in 2020. People have essentially appreciating people who are now dressed as cosplayers now, as opposed to say 20 to 25 years ago, where they were kind of like scrutinized. So, and then people like, and then you will go into see people creating all these cosplay videos, that sort of thing, and people like, oh, I love how you did all this, all that. And 20 years ago, people like. Would probably be making fun of these people because they just look like they're coming up as crazy lunatics, even though they aren't crazy lunatics. They're just doing the stuff that they love. But to finish my point, when you look at, I know it's a long-winded point, so I do apologize. But to finish that point, cosplay has essentially evolved from being like almost free and scrutinized to essentially a performing art in general. Mm-hmm. Do you see? And I know that even at Comic-Cons, I'm not sure if they still do it now. They still do they still do like the best of, where it's like we're doing like almost like a model walk off where people just come up, show their costumes. It's like
cosplay competitions. Yeah, they're totally a thing. I just entered my first virtual cosplay competition myself. I've never done it before, but just because I'm so intimidated. I've been cosplaying for 5 or 6 years. Time is irrelevant nowadays.
Yeah. Time is a flat circle.
Exactly. So I was always too intimidated because I would see the people who, would sew their own costumes. At the time, I hadn't learned to sew. I got into sewing because of cosplay.
Yeah.
And, they would make these elaborate, like, wings and props. And I would just admire, like, I don't want to compete with them. I just want to admire what they can do, because people think cosplay is just like, oh, you find a costume and you put it on and you're this character. Yeah. And there's no shame in people who just want to casual cosplay. It's still great for the people who do it. But the time and dedication that some people put into their cosplays and their props and the skill is just absolutely incredible. And this is coming from someone, as far as like sewing my own costumes, this one, I was one of the first ones I made myself for this year, and it took me about 3 weeks, whereas to my Book of the Dead I made 5 years ago, and that took me about 3 months of, trying to get it right, trying to figure out ways to accomplish what I wanted to without spending a whole lot of money. And I think that's where my theater degree has gotten us some use, because some of the stuff I learned in
Yep.
in shop for building sets really helped me build this. And it really doesn't matter what your skill level is with cosplay. I started thrifting all my costumes and trying to be as accurate as possible. It doesn't matter if you are thrifting your cosplays, if you spend years making your cosplay, it doesn't matter what you look like too. I think that's one of the things about cosplay that I've fallen in love with. And this ties into my theater background. So when I moved to New York, I've always had a thing about my weight and how I look, talking about the body being a tool, but also getting in that mindset is also very harmful. So getting to New York and going on audition after audition, not being seen or not getting cast, that can take a toll. And sometimes, in my case, taking a toll affects my body.
Yeah.
And when I would get cast in things, it became, oh, you need to look a certain way. I've had directors send me pictures of people in prison camp saying, this is what you need to look like.
Jesus.
And if I have one more person tell me I need to be in Hairspray, I'm going to lose my mind. But with cosplay, it's free range. You get to, embody a character that you've, for me personally, one of my favorite people to cosplay is Evie from The Mummy, because I grew up with the movie. I've always admired the character, not because she was smart, but she was nerdy too. And she wasn't afraid to be nerdy. So I can, cosplay as her, and it doesn't matter what I look like. You could be someone of a different race and cosplay the same character. It doesn't matter, just as long as you have that passion for it.
And it's a very easy costume all by itself. I want to say fairly easy, but it's a fairly easy look to do, because you just need for some reason I was thinking of Rick, because Rick is more like brown pants, white shirt, suspenders, like the gun strap thing, whatever, the wristband thing.
Yeah. But making those leather straps, I know people who to get it screen accurate, it's not just like, oh, you get some suspenders, or like hunting down those things or making them yourself. Yeah. It takes a lot.
Yeah. Tell me, and I do want to know, you mentioned, because I know on your social media, which I'll ask you later, right before we end, because there's always a social media shout out. I know you just posted on social media the Eevee look of like, choose your character, the Eevee look, and you did all the Eevee looks, like, oh, Eevee the librarian, Eevee when she's going to Hamanatra, Eevee at the start of the second movie, Eevee when she's like reincarnated as Akshunamanu's like enemy. And I'm like, and I will say this, in terms of Mummy 2, that's like one of the things I don't like about Mummy 2 is like that they suddenly, like she's suddenly the reincarnation of like Akshunamanu's like enemy, or like I'm like
the Pharaoh's daughter, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, suddenly she's the Pharaoh's daughter. I'm like, why? and this is just, and we were just talking about the thing with the Dracula trope, where it's like the reincarnation of the Dracula's wife or first love, that sort of thing. Like Meter is like the reincarnation of his first, his wife or something like that. But even though I don't like that, plot aspect of it, Rachel Weisz still makes the character her own, even when she's supposed to be like this reincarnation of the Pharaoh's daughter. And Nefertiti, there we go. I forgot the name of the character until it just suddenly came into my mind. But yeah, in terms of Evie, the character, you mentioned that, she's confident, she's nerdy, that sort of thing. Are there any other things that like this kind of like sparks your like interest in that character outside of those like two things?
It really varies, because she is very confident, she is nerdy, but she was someone that made me, in the past being like, it's okay to be a nerdy and you can still be the heroine, because in my opinion, Evie is the true hero of the month. She's the catalyst of the plot. I actually did an interview with Sci-Fi where I was like, she you know, a lot of these tropes where the girl is just there to be a damsel.
Yeah.
She's just there to get saved, to be like, oh no, come rescue me. And even though she does have to get rescued in the movie, she's the one that ultimately defeats the villain by, you know, knowing what she knows, putting it to use, and saving the day.
Well,
yes, she was the one that raised the mummy in the first place, but that's what it's like. She's the real catalyst of the story.
Give where credit's due. It was Jonathan who helped, who was able to help her in the end. It's like, this stork thing. What is this stork?
A manifest!
Give credit to Jonathan, who may be an idiot or maybe just like a lush, but he is also a helper in the end. But
he's a lovable character.
Yeah, I love Jonathan as a character because one, he in any other horror movie, he'd be like one of the first people dead. Like, he's the guy who probably would be the one who would have waking up the money by accident. But no, he's one of the great heroes. It's like, not only is he a good hero, but he's also hilarious, charming, and also he has a great rapport, but also with Evie, but also with Rick. And Rick himself is a great character all by himself because one, he's like, he has like the Indiana Jones trope where it's just like, he's the adventurer, that sort of thing, but he's also a criminal, that sort of thing. And you expect him to be like, he wouldn't say that he has the Han Solo aspect where it's like, he's got to probably leave them to die. But no, he actually goes like the full tilt and actually goes to save Evie at the end. So yeah, it's like, Rick is like I want to say Rick O'Connell is one of the great Universal monster heroes along with Evie and John.
Oh yeah.
So
but as far as like why I choose to, cosplay Evie, and it goes along with a lot of other characters that I really like to cosplay, is I try to find something that I really admire about the characters. With Evie, it's her intelligence and her, kind of nerdiness. But with Claire from Outlander, which is another character that I love to cosplay in several different forms, I absolutely love her strength and just she's been through a lot of hard stuff, but she always finds a way to pick herself back up and do what needs to be done for the one she loves. So with every character that I try to cosplay, I always look for those important qualities. Like, what about this character do I love? What about the performance that the actors have brought to the table? What do I admire about that? And how can I take what they've offered in their craft? How could I apply it to not only my own, but to real life? And then Scarlet Witch, I love cosplaying her because I'm sorry, Thor, she is the strongest Avenger.
Yes. When she's able to essentially whoop Thanos' ass, especially the Thanos who doesn't even know her and still whip his ass, like, that's a strong Avenger.
And especially in the comics too, and I hope we get to see this more with WandaVision and the upcoming movies whenever they're going to come out. But she in the comics is able to wipe out the majority of the mutant race by just saying 3 words and completely alter reality. Exactly.
Of course.
My buddies at Popcorn Prattle will know how sick they are of me talking about House of M.
I keep hearing about House of M, and especially back in the day, I was like, no more mutants. I'm like, wait, they actually had no more mutants now. It's like, and imagine being me back in 2005, unsure what the hell was happening in Marvel Comics, and then reading online, it's like, there's no more mutants. Like literally, there's mutants left, but there's hardly any more mutants left. It was like she basically did the down snap, but like she essentially split, like essentially half the mutants in general. Okay, I do have a couple last questions. One of the last questions still does involve cosplay. In terms of cosplay, have you encountered a character that is hard to recreate? Because I've seen people who have cosplay in fully functional Five Nights at Freddy characters. Like literally, the more later games where it's like they're more animatronic. They actually have like working stuff, and I'm like, this is impressive, that sort of thing. And especially since these characters are supposed to be, animatronics itself, and here's these people who look like they're working actual animatronic things. Have you actually found a character that you found in the past that was hard to recreate, but in the end, through your essentially technical know-how, not only with theater know-how, especially as with your theater background, was there a character that essentially that you found that was hard to create, but in the end was actually kind of easy to create, but still hard to just recreate in general?
There's a couple that I found challenges in. Two of them mostly being Evie and Claire. I've done a couple Claire cosplays, and this was actually a costume that was made by someone I know, Costumes by Ali. She is so talented, and she helped me out before I learned how to do this.
Yeah.
So there is in the second season of Outlander, Claire has this beautiful green Rococo-esque dress. And I was like, I want to do this so bad. It's gorgeous. And I was able to save up and find the costume. But it's not very smart to wear a costume like that at Comic-Con, because this costume in the Rococo era and being a historically based dress, it's a lot of a boned bodice that is very structured. But not only that, is that you have to have the undergarments, you have to have a panier, which is the type of, it's basically a sort of hoop skirt that makes you look like you got hips for days. So
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So that costume, I've never felt.
I've seen pictures of that, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like the.
I've never felt.
Big shirt thing.
Yeah, I've never felt more confident than I do in that dress. But walking around a convention in that thing, I would get the tail of the dress stepped on quite a bit, and that got annoying. But also getting through doorways is so much fun. I did that dress because the cast of Outlander was doing a panel, so I had to walk. The convention is always at the Javits Center, but sometimes if they have big panels, like for a show like Outlander, they will have them at Madison Square Garden. So not only did I have to walk from the Javits Center to Madison Square Garden in that monstrosity, but getting through security, I could not walk forward through the metal detectors. I literally had to turn to the side and shuffle my way through with the security guards laughing at me the entire time. So that's probably one of the more difficult costumes. And also, whenever I'm Evie, it doesn't matter what outfit of Evie's I choose to wear, whether it's her final nightgown or her library outfit, I always try to carry my Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead, there are people who make amazing replicas and lightweight replicas. This is not lightweight. I made this from a box from Michael's, painted it. The details were hand carved out of foam, and the hinges were made from door openers and clay, and the spine is a paper towel roll. So there are some of them that I had to be real DIY with. And I made it specifically this way so I don't have to carry a purse. It opens like I'm opening a book, but it can also hold like my wallet and my phone. And I did this to, because you don't want to see Evie wearing a purse. I tried to be as in character as possible with it. But when I do fill up that thing, it gets very heavy. And so by the end of a convention, I carry it in this arm usually, and then hold my key that I made in this hand. So whenever we get stopped for pictures, I can have it ready to pose. Yeah. That's one of the most things, like when people stop and ask for a picture, it's very flattering. But that thing does get really heavy. So by the end of the convention, my arm is a noodle. One of the best things about cosplay is getting out of cosplay. At the end of the day, you get to take something off, you get to throw your hair in a bun, wipe off the makeup, and just like, I'm me again.
I'm just kind of reminded of one of my favorite movies is RoboCop, and I'm just kind of reminded of how Peter Weller was in the shoot most of the time. And then they got to a point where they had to give him fans inside the suit, that sort of thing. And he's just sweating buckets underneath the suit. And then when he talks about the suit, he's always remembering fondly of it, because even though it was hellish for him, he's like, he remembers fondly of it, because even though there is difficulties in cosplay, and you're creating a cosplay that is so difficult, say, like, what you just mentioned, especially when you're holding up a perfectly sized replica that kind of is, that's a functioning replica, but at the same time, you're still holding a wallet, everything into, like, putting whatever's inside of there. It gets heavy.
It out.
At the end of the day, once you're out of the costume, it's sort of like in theater. Like, once you're out of that costume in theater, and you're just you again, it is like, oh.
Yeah.
You just like relax.
Yeah, it's like when you're done with the show, cosplay, it's big on theatrics. And I've tried to use, what I've learned in college towards, this new form of theatrics, or this new form of whatever it is I'm doing that I'm passionate about, that I'm just really excited about. But it's the same as, when you're done with the show, wipe off your makeup and you go home and you rest, and it's rewarding.
And on that note, do we have any, I only have essentially 2 questions left, but three questions really, but the third one's really just like the social media shout-outs. I don't really call it a question, it's more like a shout-out thing, but I do have 2 questions left. Do you have, once COVID sort of like stops being a nuisance, or at least stops being a nuisance in New York City, where it's just like, we're kind of like back to phase 4, because right now phase 4 has been approved in New York City, but we don't know when like theaters and everything will be back open thing. Once there is a sense of theater back in New York, what can we essentially see in terms of like your foreseeable futures? Like, what can we see in the future?
For myself, hopefully I can take this time to, this quarantine time where I'm going to have a lot of time on my hands to really focus on myself and talking about how my body is my tool, getting my body back in shape to being the tool that I want to, but also taking that time to really rest and relax and prepare my mind for, getting back to doing what I came to New York to do. So that's my plans. And also, hopefully during this time, I've got a list on this little blackboard here of all, now that I know how to sew, or I'm learning, learning, I'm still in the process. I've got a list of costumes that I'm hoping to bring to the next convention.
Yeah.
Yes, I've got a couple Star Wars ones, a couple Broadway ones. I'm a big Phantom of the Opera fan. A lot of my social media stuff is Little Lottie, because that was my first big fandom, was the Phantom of the Opera. And I have my dream, and one of the reasons I really got into theater was because I wanted to play Christine Daae. I still do, whether in the Andrew Lloyd Webber version or heck in a new Dark Universe. I love the story and I would love to play the character, but I want to do a couple for costumes, and then a costume from Six, the musical, which is one of my new favorites. If you don't know what it is, I highly recommend. So many bops and such a good story.
Yes, nothing like decapitation or two. Because I know Six is about the Baudelaire, not the Baudelaires, the Bolden, about Henry VI and his wife. So it's like,
Henry VIII and all his wives come
Henry
back to form a Spice Girls girl group, and it's insane, but it's such a weird concept, but it works so well because the music is great. Bonus, it's only 90 minutes. So it's a 90-minute show, no intermission, and I don't think it needs an intermission.
No.
And it's also like, they talk about a lot. These women were known for just being the wives of a scandalous king, but what else do they have to bring to the table? It's, taking back their story of, these women in history that are only seen for one thing, but can be known for so much more.
For my last question, it's kind of fairly easy. Do you have any advice to people watching or listening at their YouTube/podcast convenience?
If the performing arts, if cosplay, if podcasting, if it's something that you're curious about or it's something you want to do it. Do not let a soul stop you if this is something that you are truly passionate about. Don't let things like saying, oh, you can't do that, or you don't look a certain way, or you don't have the skills. Don't let that stop you. If it's something that you're passionate and driven about, and if it's on your heart, carry on.
And lastly, I think you mentioned your social media already, but could you repeat your social media?
Sure.
Just to get more people to follow you on Twitter or Facebook or Friendster or MySpace or whatever.
I haven't thought about MySpace in a hot second.
I know.
You can be in my top 8.
I kind of brought that joke I brought back that joke last night, or maybe in the last couple episodes. So every now and then, Friendster and MySpace has got to be the recurrent joke of like when
Solid.
you talk about because I do remember coming home from college one night, and I'm going to my I remember so vividly. I'm going to the bus stop, and there's this guy handing out Friendster things. Like, I'm like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, oh, this is just Friendster. You could just sign up and everything. It's like, and I'm like,
oh my gosh.
I'm like, I have MySpace, dude. It's like MySpace is like the way that it's like I'm thinking to myself, I don't even have a MySpace or something like that. And then maybe a month or two later, I just signed up for my MySpace. And now
oh my gosh.
Now it's 10 years later. It's like I don't even have a MySpace anymore. I have just a Facebook and an Instagram, and Twitter. So I'm sold. I still have my Snapchat, but yeah. But yeah, in terms of your social media,
you can mostly find me on Instagram at Little Lottie. That's Little Lottie, all one word. That's where I post most of what's going on in my life, and also a lot of my cosplays and progress and things of the sort that I do. I just recently joined TikTok because I'm cool with the kids. And that's Little Lottie Cosplay, all one word. And I also have a cosplay Facebook page, which is Little Lottie Face Cosplay. Definitely check out Popcorn Prattle. Go listen to our past episodes. Hopefully we'll be back soon after this little mental health hiatus. And you can also find me. I am a blogger and writer for the social media teams of both Outlander Cast, which is a wonderful podcast talking about Outlander, and also Universal Monsters Universe. We talk about, the new monsters, the old OG monsters, and it's just all love. So you can find me at any of those places.
And on that note, thank you again. Thank you, Lindy. Lindy, right?
Lindley.
Lindley. We've been talking for so long that I forgot how to say names.
It's the story of my life. I've gotten Lily, Lindsay, Ling has happened more than once.
Wow. Well, Miss Key.
Yeah, there we go. I'll take it.
Miss Key, thank you for being a great guest today on my podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Again, for the people watching, just stay safe, wear a mask, don't be stupid. Just
Amen.
Have fun, everybody. And until next time, take care.